As the Iran talks collapse, Israel now appears to be picking a fresh fight with one of America's own NATO allies. Tensions between Israel and Turkey are heating up after Netanyahu insulted Erdogan online, turning a political dispute into a sharp public confrontation. Calling Netanyahu the Hitler of our time, Ankara launched a blistering attack on the Israeli leader. After Iran, is Israel preparing to widen its conflict toward Turkey? As former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's warning adds weight to claims that Ankara is now being cast as the next major threat. The Turkish Foreign Ministry issued a statement on April 11 in response to remarks made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey's reaction came after Netanyahu said Erdogan had massacred his own Kurdish citizens, a charge that immediately triggered a fierce and unusually personal response from the Turkish side. The Israeli Prime Minister made those remarks on X while also vowing to continue fighting the Iranian regime despite the ceasefire. In its response, the Turkish government invoked Netanyahu's alleged war crimes and went so far as to describe him as the Hitler of our time. Turkish Foreign Ministry statement said, and I quote, "Netanyahu, who has been described as the Hitler of our time due to the crimes he has committed, is a well-known figure with a clear track record. An arrest warrant has been issued against Netanyahu by the International Criminal Court on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Under Netanyahu's administration, Israel is facing proceedings before the International Court of Justice on charges of genocide. Netanyahu's current objective is to undermine ongoing peace negotiations and continue his expansionist policies in the region. Failing this, he risks being tried in his own country and is likely to be sentenced to imprisonment. The fact that our president has been targeted by Israeli officials with baseless, brazen, and false allegations is a result of the discomfort caused by the truths we have consistently voiced on every platform. Turkey will continue to stand by innocent civilians and will further its efforts to ensure that Netanyahu is held accountable for the crimes he has committed." Unquote. Earlier, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett had warned that Turkey posed a new and growing threat, suggesting that concerns in Israel are now expanding beyond Iran alone. Bennett made those remarks while addressing the 2026 Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, using the forum to outline what he sees as Israel's evolving regional dangers. According to I24 News, Bennett described Erdogan as a sophisticated and dangerous adversary, portraying the Turkish president as a strategic challenge that Israel can no longer afford to ignore. Naftali Bennett said, and I quote, "Erdogan is a sophisticated and dangerous adversary who wants to surround Israel. The country must not turn a blind eye again. While certain Israeli officials are on Qatari payroll, Qatar and Turkey, which is based in Syria, and with Israeli consent in Gaza are feeding a new monstrous axis of the Muslim Brotherhood similar to the Iranian one. A new Turkish threat is emerging. We must act in different ways, but simultaneously against the threat from Tehran and against the hostility from Ankara. I must tell the truth. Israel's current leadership divided us and is dividing us now more than ever. I will not let the leadership that failed continue. I intend to lead Israel into its next chapter, stronger. After 3 decades since coming to power, and after the greatest disaster in Israel's history occurred on his watch, a leader must know when to step down with dignity. Israel is greater than any one person. The next chapter must be written by new leadership, without those people responsible for the disaster." Unquote. Israel now appears to be projecting Turkey as a new existential threat even as the Iran ceasefire remains in place. However, the Iranian threat is still not off the table for Israel because the Islamabad talks have failed to produce a deal. The US-Iran talks held on April 11 in Islamabad now appear to have collapsed without a deal, after both sides failed to bridge major differences despite a marathon round of negotiations. Iranian media is now reacting strongly after 21 hours of negotiations failed to produce any breakthrough, portraying the outcome as proof of how deep the divide with Washington still remains. Iran's press TV blamed what it called unreasonable and excessive demands by the United States for the breakdown, arguing that Washington's position made a workable framework impossible. Contentious issues such as the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear rights, and other disputed matters are being blamed for the failure, highlighting how many of the core disagreements remain unresolved. Iran state broadcaster IRIB said U.S. demands stalled the talks despite multiple initiatives from Tehran, presenting the collapse as the result of American rigidity rather than Iranian unwillingness to negotiate. IRIB reported, and I quote, "The Iranian delegation negotiated continuously and intensively for 21 hours in order to protect the national interests of the Iranian people despite various initiatives from the Iranian delegation. The unreasonable demands of the American side prevented the progress of the negotiations. Thus the negotiations ended." Unquote. Iran's Tasnim news agency said there would be no change in the situation at the Strait of Hormuz, signaling that Tehran is not prepared to ease pressure on the vital waterway without major movement from Washington. Tasnim also indicated that the Strait of Hormuz is unlikely to reopen unless the United States agrees to what Iran considers a reasonable deal, making the waterway a central point of leverage in the negotiations. According to Tasnim, Iran even urged the American side to accept what it called reality, suggesting that Tehran believes Washington must adjust its expectations if it wants any diplomatic breakthrough. Iran repeatedly presented new initiatives in an attempt to break the deadlock over key demands, Tasnim reported, showing that Tehran wants to project itself as engaged while still resisting pressure. A source told Fars news agency that the United States was trying to gain through talks what it had failed to secure through war, a line that sharply reflects Iran's hardened public posture after the negotiations stalled. Fars correspondent in Pakistan also said Iran did not accept what it described as excessive U.S. demands, underlining the deep mistrust and major gaps that continue to separate the two sides. No date or venue has yet been fixed for the next round of talks, according to reports citing Tasnim news agency, after the Islamabad meeting ended without an agreement. Iran has also signaled it has no plans for further talks for now, with reports saying Tehran believes the U.S. was looking for an excuse to walk away from the negotiations. Iranian source said, I quote, "The Americans needed the negotiation for their lost face in the international arena and were unwilling to lower their expectations despite the defeat and stalemate in the war with Iran. Iran has no plans for the next round of talks." Unquote. Trump's deputy, J.D. Vance, claimed that Iran's nuclear program was one of the main deterrent issues in the talks, making it clear that Washington still sees Tehran's atomic ambitions as a central obstacle to any agreement. Iran, meanwhile, argued that Trump sent the United States to the negotiating table only after failing to seize control of its uranium, framing the talks as proof that military pressure had not achieved Washington's goals. Subsequently, the top U.S. negotiator left Pakistan after the talks failed to produce a deal, underscoring the breakdown of what had been a closely watched round of high-stakes diplomacy. U.S. Vice President Vance announced that no deal could be reached, but he described that outcome as bad news for Iran, signaling that Washington still wanted to project confidence despite the impasse. Before Vance made those remarks, the Iranian government's handle on X had said that negotiations would continue despite remaining differences, indicating that Tehran was publicly trying to keep the door open even as positions stayed far apart.
Good morning, everybody, and let me say a couple of notes of appreciation. First of all, to the Prime Minister of Pakistan and to Field Marshal Munir, who were both incredible hosts. And whatever shortcomings in the negotiation, it wasn't because of the Pakistanis, who did an amazing job and really tried to help us and the Iranians bridge the gap and get to a deal. We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms. Questions?
Sir, Nick Robertson from CNN. Precisely what have they rejected here? Can you help us understand it a little bit?
Well, I won't go into all the details because I don't want to negotiate in public after we negotiated for 21 hours in private. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations. Again, their nuclear program, such as it is, the enrichment facilities that they had before, they've been destroyed. But the simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term. We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will. Jen.
Was there a framework on anything? And also, did the Iranian frozen assets come up? And did you reach any conclusions on those frozen assets?
We talked about all those issues, Jen, and we talked about a number of issues beyond that. And so certainly those things came up. But again, we just could not get to a situation where the Iranians were willing to accept our terms. I think that we were quite flexible. We were quite accommodating. The president told us, you need to come here in good faith and make your best effort to get a deal. We did that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make any headway. Preston.
Mr. Vice President, how often did you communicate with President Trump throughout the negotiations? There were reports that there were multiple rounds, where there were breaks in between negotiations. How often did you communicate with the president throughout those rounds, and what was he saying as you were going through these negotiations that you said fell short?
Yeah, obviously we were talking to the president consistently. I don't know how many times we talked to him, a half dozen times, a dozen times over the past 21 hours. We obviously also talked to Admiral Cooper, to Pete, to Marco, to the entire national security team. We talked to Scott Bessent a number of times. So look, we were constantly in communication with the team because we were negotiating in good faith. And we leave here with a very simple proposal, a method of understanding that is our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. Thank you.